Hello everyone and welcome back to the Slow Car Salon. You find me in a much more spacious garage than the last one I was working in because now the swap shall commence. In this episode we're going to take the original motor out of the Accord and pop the F20B in. So let's get started.
Alright, so this is the last drive with the wagon and its stock engine. Not its original engine because it has been replaced once at least. However, I don't know, I don't think I'll miss it very much. The F22 is a very awesome engine for economic reasons. It'll do 30 mpg all day, get regular gas, climb hills, cruise. When I drove it 1,300 miles without a hiccup and got nearly 30 plus mpg, which in this wagon with the 17-gallon fuel tank was pretty impressive, getting nearly 500 miles on a single tank. That was crazy. So, I don't know, not too much to miss other than just, yeah, it's a good motor for the Accord, but I'm definitely looking forward to having a bit more performance, even if it is a slightly smaller engine. The F20B is a 2-liter instead of a 2.2, so it should be fine for around town cruising. Maybe you'd have to wind it out a little bit for the highway, but we already got another wagon for long highway stretch cruising, so you'll probably see that in another video. Enjoying the last moments of this engine in this car while it lasts, because then you'll have VTEC power.
Alright, so there was a pretty significant jump ahead in time here, but gotta get cracking, can't waste time because I'm going to try to get the swap done over the weekend. Quick overview of all of what I've removed so far in order to start getting the engine out. Starting over here, I got the battery tray, the whole air intake, disconnected all of the vacuum lines that I needed to disconnected the wiring harness. Upper and lower radiator hoses are pulled out, as well as the radiator itself. Pulled the power steering pump up and out of the way for now because I'm just going to drain it from the low pressure side to at least get all of the fluid out of the lines from this height. I'm not going to drain it completely, although I'm going to be replacing this high pressure line, so I may need to seek a drain pan at the power steering rack when that time comes. I got the alternator and alternator bracket out. I've disconnected the AC compressor just from the bracket. I took the belt off of, obviously, in order to do that. Took out the slave cylinder here with its unique hardline situation. I'll have a separate flex cable that will bolt to that union that sits on top of the transmission. You kind of see it under here, underneath the distributor. That is not the clutch damper, by the way. The clutch damper is down there. You can see there's potentially a little fitting there and a little cylinder with a hard line coming out of it, just to the right of this shifter linkage. So yeah, that is something we can remove and bypass, but this is just a union. This is not a damper. So we're going to connect to that and replace the clutch line, as well as use the original hard line that already exists here. It's just kind of hanging in space. So we got that. When it comes time to get the crane in the front of the car, I'm also going to pull the front bumper off as well. Also pulled off the under tray, placed it over there. I'm going to pull this wheel off in a little bit just so that I have access for the crane to go under. The only thing left at this point, I think, is then just disconnecting all of the mounts. We got to get that bolt out of the T-bracket and the rear motor mount there. Oh, wow, it's also a polyurethane one. Man, no wonder this thing shakes so hard. There's a couple of heater hoses back here to disconnect as well, so we can make sure those don't get pulled on. Wire harness wise, everything is mostly contained on the engine. The only thing, and hopefully we can see it down here, that you got to look out for. I am currently not seeing it. You got to follow the high pressure hose down here to see it, but I think it's going to be a little more buried under the intake manifold, so hopefully there'll be more access as we start to pull the engine. But something to note is that there will be a, on the high pressure line there, so more toward the steering rack and underneath the intake manifold, there will be a power steering pressure sensor, and we got to make sure to disconnect that because that's routed off of the engine harness, and you will tear it out if you take out the engine with it without disconnecting that. So yeah, once we're done getting all the mounts off, the T-bracket, transmission mount, torque mount, and the engine mount, then we'll also have to make sure we unhook the shifter cables, and then also make sure that we get the fuel line out of the way, which we have. We've done that already here, and we use this fitting here on the end of the fuel rail to depressurize the system. So we got that. And yeah, I think that pretty much is it. Yeah, just heater hoses, mounts, shifter linkage, and then all the AC lines are mostly out of the way, so then we'll just grab, there's a loop down there. You can see kind of just past the shifter cable boot, there's a loop there. We'll hook into the transmission to lift it from there. And then there's another loop here on the power steering pump bracket that we'll use. So don't remove this bracket yet. You can remove the pump, disconnect that, but the bracket stays on, so that way you have purchase for your load balancer on your engine hoist. Oh, it looks like there's a few harnesses I forgot to take care of that come off of here. So let's do that really quick. Make sure that you pull the tab off of the mounting bracket before you try pulling the connector off, because it won't come off, because that is what stops the connector from pulling out accidentally. So make sure you take your time and get all of your connector tabs out and off of your mounting brackets. All right, so we're pretty much there in terms of being almost ready to pull this motor out. I've loosened all the motor mount bolt brackets and disconnected the exhaust and pretty much everything else behind the intake manifold, cooling lines, connectors, things like that. So this is ready to go. I just can't get my axle nuts off. I tried using a breaker bar and still wasn't enough, and ended up, as you can see, steering the wheels a little bit. So clearly was making the bushings move a bit and not really making any progress with the breaker bar, so I'm gonna go run and grab some air tools and knock them out. Okay, well that ended up just needing more balls from the compressor. Just needed a full capacity in order to hit with the torque required with the air impact. So with that done, we can now get the car back up in the air, pull the wheels off, pull the axles out, and then we'll be ready. Because that was the only thing that I had outstanding here. after some hoisting and shoving and moving some stuff around, the original motor is out. I was able to do so, sneaking the power steering and air conditioning compressor out of the way. Since now I have the room, I can disconnect the power steering line and drain it so I can replace the pump. So yeah, then the next step of business will be just getting the transmission off, because I'm going to be reusing this transmission on the motor, even though it is an H2U4 and the ratios are not great for a nice VTEC engine, but I don't have the T2 T4 that I'd like to have that has the LSD as well. So unfortunately, it'll have to make do. Was able to also pull the VSS out of the way so I didn't have to disconnect the lines there. Yeah, otherwise everything really slid out very smoothly. The only other slight hang up I had was just on the transmission mount, right? I just had to kind of scoot it out of the mount bracket. But other than that, we're looking pretty good. To get the axles out, I had to pull the spindles off entirely, which is very much BMW territory. I don't know what's happening with that, but on my Prelude, I didn't have to do this when I had to get the axles out last time. I was able to just kind of pull the spindle out of the way far enough such that I was able to get the axle out of the way and remove them. So this was a bit of a different strategy than I am used to, but it worked out and they came out really easy. A little too easy maybe, but another point of concern was that none of the castle nuts for the ball joints or like the tie rods or anything like that had cotter pins in them. So I have a cotter pin kit, so I'll put new cotter pins in everything. So at least we'll have that. Just going to give everything a good clean. Also, I guess while we're here, I'll pull the shifter cables out and we'll do the shifter cable bushings on the engine side now that we actually have room for them, and go from there. All right, engine is out on the hoist, or lifted up on the hoist, and my transmission transaxle, gee whiz, is on the ground. Clearly needs a bit of cleaning, a bit more cleaning than I bargained for, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I'm going to replace this eventually. I'm going to swap out the transmission mount because I have a stock rubber one. This would be a good time to do the axle seals, but like I said, this is not the transmission I'm going to use in the long term. We've got some kind of a clutch here. It's very dirty, very grimy. I don't know what it's from. However, I believe our new clutch and flywheel comes with a new thrown-out bearing, so I'm going to make sure that gets thrown on. Could also just use this one again if I'm going to swap out the transaxle anyways. But yeah, just needs a pretty significant degreasing. Also, I was wondering why it looked like the belt had chewed through the timing cover, and that's because the harmonic balancer has failed, which is great. So I'm going to just take that off so the next guy can put a new one on, because you will just need a new one. I took the T-bracket off. I'm going to reuse that T-bracket so that it all works on the same mounting. And yeah, just going to put this on the stand and then bring it home and clean it up for sale. And then on the car side, just got a bit of cleaning to do here as well. Nothing too major except for just this corner where like the power steering and AC was, and then I'm going to disconnect the PS pump so I can drain all the fluid out because I have a new pump for it. Otherwise, it's really not too bad, and you're not all too grimy or gross, which is great. I am going to take care of this slave cylinder situation. I have a new slave cylinder. I'm going to remove this wacky looking hard line and also just replace the master cylinder as well. New hose for the reservoir, and see if I can't get a new flex line from here all the way over to the union by the shifter housing like I had pointed out before. marriage of engine and transaxle, which was a bit tough to get all aligned properly. And another thing I realized while assembling it is I don't have all the right spec length bolts for certain locations, like down here. However, it wasn't stopping me from getting it all together. I just made sure I had enough length, I wasn't pulling threads out or anything like that. And I used the starter motor as well to help pull things in, so that's also on the transaxle. So it is about ready to throw in. Still have to go over here and make my preparations in the engine bay. Still got to do my shifter cable bushings. Still got to do my clutch master and slave cylinder and my power steering high pressure line. That is the last item to get the engine bay ready and pop the new engine in. Another thing I realized is that I clearly am missing something for this transaxle mount, because the new mount only has that mounting tab, and then there's two, I don't know if you could see them, but there's two studs and nuts under there that appears to bolt to some other bracket, whereas the original, or I guess aftermarket, polyurethane mount has all the feet it needs to mount to all the stud locations, but this one doesn't have it, so I don't know what's happening there exactly. All right, now I've also removed the engine wire harness off of the old motor because we got to transfer this to the new one. There's a couple of connections on here that seem to be specific to the CB7 or CB9 in this case chassis, so we are going to reuse this. I am only slightly worried about the length of the alternator wire right here, just because the valve cover is so much wider on the F20 and so much narrower on the F22. So I'm hoping I don't have to go in and do an extension on this, but I guess we'll see. We just got to route this. I'll probably start from underneath the intake manifold and kind of work my way out to the left side of the engine here where the starter motor lives, because kind of this is the area where the main branch of the wire harness exits. Okay, so it's been a week and I've tried to get a couple other parts that I was missing, particularly one of the brackets that would mount the transmission mount to the gear housing here on this stud, and this stud. And I bought a bracket off of eBay here thinking it was the right one, but no, this is for the automatic. So yeah, that's not quite lining up at all. And then another thing I noticed is that this water neck does not have the threads for one of the temperature sensors. So I got another one and it does have the threads in it. So we'll just swap that out and also put the OEM gasket from there onto here, as well as transfer the temperature sensor over so that this water neck stays with this engine. All right, now I've also got the bushings out of the shifter cables. I ended up just kind of holding them. Now that I actually had room to manipulate them, I just got an engine mount bolt and just pushed the rubber bushings out of the shifter cable ends because, well, that's just how loose they were. Now luckily the Fat 4 Customs ones are extremely easy to install. One goes in like that, and then you get an E-clip to secure them, which I may need actually a tool to do. Guess just had to get my soft hammer, soft mallet, and just kind of get that seated. So now the E-clip is totally seated in that groove. Click. Okay, there. Pliers got it that time. The fit is still a little loose though. On the smaller bushing, it's loose, but on the larger bushing, it's the exactly correct fit. So I wonder if it's more of a height issue. Okay, next is to get the old clutch damper off and get rid of the flex line that's just sort of hanging out in there. So that should be pretty easy. Looks like there's 1, 2, 3 12mm bolts holding the bracket on. There we go. Okay, now I'm gonna get to the fuel filter here. We just got one banjo bolt for the fuel line and then one hard line from the tank itself. I'm gonna spray that a little bit with PB Blaster and loosen it up. And it should come off pretty easily considering this was a California car and rust is not a thing you have to worry about there. So let's get into it. Oh wow, that was easier than I expected. All right, I gotta support the backside of the fuel filter bracket while I try to undo this. Okay. Looks like we've got to remove this solenoid block here. Aha, there we go. Okay, out you come. I said, out you come. Oh, what the hell? There we go. Okay. New fuel filter comes with the crush washers, a smaller one for some reason, but you're going to use two of the larger ones that come in the bag. Right. There we go. One more crank for good measure. There. There we go. Tuck the shifter cables back over here. All right, now the last thing is to transfer the power steering pressure sensor. Yeah, this is like a 21 or a 22, and then there's some flats here, which are 17mm. There's also a bracket here with the bushing I gotta transfer to the new pump, or new line rather. Oh, oy-yi-yi. That was violent, but I got it. There we go. There we go. Okay, and I guess we'll plug it back in after I fix this tape situation. That is pretty much all of the engine bay prep that I need to do. Got the rear motor mount, got the fuel filter, shifter cable bushings, the new power steering line out of a Honda Prelude. Oh, can't forget about the clutch line. Got to do the master cylinder and the reservoir. Oh yeah, let's not forget to slot the half shaft in here. What? Let's see. This bracket, slot half shaft in. There we go. Okay, that took some manipulation just because I had to hold the position of the shaft to line up the splines and get these lined up. So let's put the bolts here with the bushings here.
And there's finally one last bolt that goes in here. Install that there. Now, before I claim that the engine bay prep is done, like I said, we still got to do the clutch master and slave. So I have a new slave cylinder, a new master cylinder, and a new clutch line, flex line that has the -3 AN to metric end fittings, and comes with a new banjo, or actually rather I ordered this banjo, this slightly angled banjo is a 30 degree, I believe, with the appropriate size banjo for that union on the transmission I kept on talking about. So I'll just route it from there to the master cylinder. That way the stock hard line can be utilized for the slave cylinder.
I also have, here we go, seal that seals the clutch master cylinder flange to the firewall. I saw that it was available. It was on the parts diagram. I have no idea the condition of the one that's in the car, so there's your part number. We'll just swap this one out while we're doing that job anyways.
All right, got the new master cylinder in with the new line as well, so I've routed that over the brake booster using one of the factory hardline clamps, kind of trying to follow the factory route somewhat. Goes down there underneath the heater valve, which I've left loose for right now, and then that routes down, also following similar routes to the original hardline, underneath the charcoal canister, and then back out. And then it'll end at this banjo, which again goes on that union on the transmission housing. And I think it's going to end up in the right place. I have a little bit more slack to pull it forward if I need. The charcoal canister was off of its firewall bracket, so I just kind of threw it back on. Right before I put the heater valve back on, I'm going to replace a few of the heater lines, which some of them just seem to be generic or just a straight piece that was adapted. So I figure might as well replace them all. So I have the first one that goes from the heater core to the valve, just about here, we'll have to cut it. And then from the valve to the engine, which will go to this bung right here. And then we have this one that will go from the heater and then into the water crossover pipe. I'll probably have to cut it a little bit over here again, but it'll go from heater to the water crossover pipe right there. Add one of these pedal stopper pads here to the floor of the clutch, because I realized every time the pedal would smack this bracket here, it would just make a loud clang, so I got to put this little stopper in it. Now, another issue I'm running into is that the clevis for the clutch master cylinder isn't quite reaching the pedal, even though the adjuster, which is at the clutch switch itself, is almost all the way in. I'll see if I can go a little further with that and see if I can't make them meet up, because the last master cylinder here is actually leaking because the rod was overextended into the cabin towards us, because the pedal would come all the way out and then pull the rod almost out of the master cylinder, and I was actually making a little drip right there at the boot underneath the pedal bracket, which is also probably why it's rusted there. So I wonder if it was a problem with the clevis itself. It doesn't seem to be any difference with the old one versus the new one that came with the new master cylinder. So I'm going to first adjust the clutch switch a little bit, see if I can't get the pedal a little closer to the clevis, and then yeah, just try to make sure that the clevis itself still has some thread on the master cylinder rod and the two won't
bind or accidentally put any pressure on the clutch system, especially when bled, because we don't want to have any pressure being put on the throwout bearing even while the car is sitting. Okay, harness is on, well, mostly. There's a couple loose ends here that I have to either extend or try to repair, because there's just like wires here that are just on the verge of breaking or already broken, and this temp sender connection is already really loose. This green connector for this pink temperature sensor is too short, because on the Accord it points this way, and on the Prelude housing, thermostat housing that is, it points that way. So a couple loose ends there. I got to replace the reverse switch so that it can hook up here. I just got to find it somewhere in my piles out here. Over here, now I believe on the Preludes the fuel injector harness comes off this way. On the Accord, all of it comes underneath and wraps around, so it all comes out from this bundle. So I have affixed it to manifold. IAT sensors here. This was for the IAB we don't need. Still up in the air about whether or not whether the alternator harness length needs to be altered, really. But the whole thing is on, so honestly, at this point, we're ready to drop this thing in. I also put the T-bracket on, just the standard Accord T-bracket, so that's going to line up with the Accord mount. We've got to be really careful as to not break our nice new TPS, because it is the most rearward thing on the engine, and also make sure we don't break anything on the engine bay, because this header and the alternator bracket is our most forward thing on the engine bay. So let's get this thing in here. Like I said, I'm using the original polyurethane mount that came with this car, minus one nut, because I don't have one that's that shallow or has a non-flange on it in order to make that fit. Actually, wait. Oh, there we go. I think I can use this instead. Okay, never mind. It's the wrong size. Okay, we're leaving that out then. Good. Let's get this motor in. And if there's any motivation to get that motor in as soon as possible, check out my valve cover. What a beauty. I had it redone with the original blue top, dark blue. Retained the letters this time because on my Prelude I actually had them shaved for an additional fee, but I figured we'd flaunt our dual cam VTEC logo here. So anyways, that was awesome job by Charlie Moa. You should check him out on Facebook and Instagram. He develops all sorts of other cool Honda parts. But yeah, let's get the area cleared out and put this motor in. Okay, so I was having some trouble getting this slotted in. I thought I had laid everything down on the mounts, but then the T-bracket back here was like the 3 inches off of the mount back here. But what happened was essentially that tab, where sort of the tip of my flashlight is trying to get in the way of right there, was fouling on the subframe. I think you might also be able to see a little shiny spot where it was doing so. Yeah, there you go. So it was sitting on that. I didn't see it until just a moment ago. So now with that out of the way, now everything should line up at this point. So I just got to wiggle the transmission mount in, the T-bracket over the mount back there, and then kind of at the same time, make sure the rubber mount gets lined up correctly, just because it's a little harder to position, I guess, because yeah, the polyurethane mount is so stiff, like the axis through the shaft of the bushing is pretty well fixed, but this one, it can move around because, well, it's a stock mount, so just have to be a little careful there. But at this point, now I just need to kind of bring, as you can see, the motor on the cam side is a little further up, so I just need to bring that side down and try to level out the motor over the T-bracket in the rear, slot the driver's side motor mount in, and then we should be good to go. All right, the motor is in. All of the motor mount bolts went in just fine. Luckily, getting it past that hang up on the rear subframe was the ticket to getting this in, so I'm super happy about that, and it looks like it was meant to live in here this whole time. I ended up using the Accord T-bracket, Accord transmission mount, Accord mount, Prelude driver side engine mount bracket, if I'm not mistaken, and then obviously stock torque mount. I had an additional Prelude T-bracket, but didn't use that because I also used the Accord mount with the Accord T-bracket in the rear. So now everything's in, so it's just a matter of getting everything re-hooked up, accessorized, and then we should be a heck of a lot closer to getting ready to turn the key. All right, made a pretty significant dent in progress here since putting the engine in, because I'm trying to button up as much as I can up top because there's some things that I'm realizing I'm missing or don't have, or a line is too short, and I'll go over those with you here shortly. But I've hooked up the exhaust, put the distributor in and plugged that all in, plugged all the stock wiring back in. Over here, I've plugged in a little jumper that will basically bypass the injector ballast. I'm going to leave the injector ballast in because I like the bracket that it sits on. It has all these nice little tabs for mounting connectors in and around it. So I mounted the ballast bypass here and just put its connector off to the side. I reconnected the brake booster over here. I connected all of the harnessing for the fuel injectors, but those are just kind of loose at the moment because the aftermarket fuel rail doesn't have mounting tabs that will go onto the mount tabs for the plastic harness holder here. So I may just end up taking it all out and just taping it with some nice Tessa tape. Routed the power steering line and alternator cable over. I think this should be long enough. My clutch line for the reservoir to master cylinder here is unfortunately just too short. Like if I bend it over, it's like an inch off, so I probably just need a line that's a little bit longer than that, probably just about an inch or two. Further, I had to put the Accord fuel pressure regulator on here because the return port was pointed off in that direction and the line is coming out from here. So I needed to alter that. The heater hose, I should say, off of this bung that goes to the rotor crossover pipe, that's the correct length. But on the other side, the heater hose that goes to the side of the cylinder head is too short. So the bung is here and then my hose ends about here. And it's meant to go here because that's where the bung was on the Accord thermostat housing. There's also these other smaller lines that need to be hooked up from the thermostat housing to the throttle body, out from the throttle body to the IACV, and then back. So I'll have to get some lines. I have some spares I can probably put together that will make it all work. I put the vehicle speed sensor back in with the lines still hooked up. I plugged in the map sensor. These vacuum lines for these solenoids I don't have enough ports for. I have one port here, but I need to tee them off in order to make that work. And then on the cruise control, the port that I would use is just too small and it's also pointing in the wrong direction. So I have to get a converter or something like that because that is like more in line with the size of the vacuum hoses here. But the cruise control line was meant to go on this bung. Okay, yeah, and here you can see the difference in size. Another issue I'm running into is the throttle cable. If I put it in place and then hook it up on the throttle, it just has a small amount of tension in it, even at full slack. So I need to figure out what I need to do there, or if this throttle cable bracket needs to be changed, although that one is identical with the one that's on the Accord manifold now, so not sure what needs to change. I'm also hooking up the VTEC wiring for the solenoid and the pressure switch. So that is just a separate line that I'm going to run down through the firewall over here and then plug into the ECU connectors, because these are not pre-wired for VTEC, unfortunately. And then over here I have some work to do with this green connector has to route to that temperature sensor back here, whereas it was coming out this way on this side of the Accord thermostat housing. So this plug's got to get extended. This plug, it tore off. It's for one of the temperature sensors underneath the distributor. That I'm going to repair. And then this is for the dash temperature sender, and it's also too short and it's not holding. But what I've found is that like regular like motorcycle bullet connectors will work. So if you have something like these, particularly like this, so it's just a standard open barrel connector with one of these little jackets over it, and then bang, you got a solid connector for your temperature sensing unit. And it's like, I thought it was funny because these are like very much motorcycle style, and then Honda started out with motorcycles and engines, so I feel like that is pretty nice how it ends up being a quite nice click fit over that temperature sender. I'm going to also mount the valve cover on just so that I can continue to clean things up here while I wait for some other parts that I need to get, or other extensions or tees. I just went in here with an oil can and just kind of dabbed all of the cams so they wouldn't be completely dry before I put the valve cover back on. The only other thing I need to think about or figure out is this AC compressor. The clutch on the pulley is completely toast, and I have another compressor for it, but this system, unfortunately, or fortunately, because it means it was working at one point, but it's still full of Freon. So, or R134A technically, because it has been converted, which is cool. But yeah, I need to take that out and I need to purge the system, but I don't want to put the whole AC compressor back on, because then once the radiator goes in here, then I lose access to taking out those bolts. So that's rather unfortunate. So anyways, once all of that stuff is done, then I'll come over here and put the knuckles back on and axles back on each side. And that way I'll have everything nicely wrapped up on the drivetrain side, so I don't have to worry about that later. I got this Kaizen Speed IACV adapter, which is meant for stock style 2-wire IACV, which is great, but then the bolts they sent me to mount it are completely the wrong size, or wrong length I should say, because one is just way too short, one is way too long, unless there's another style of these that they were intending for you to use. I'll have to get some different size bolts so that I can fit that over my adapter. It also may hit the fuel rail, which I'm not super jazzed about, so that may require another extension here of this plug to the IACV. Like I said, there's things I know I can solve right now, get them done, like everything on top here, some wiring, hubs and axles, and then yeah, we'll have a moment to sort out everything else in the near future.
All right, got into some of the wiring fixes for the sensors here on the side of the engine. I extended this wire over here just using a piece of a turn signal cable. So it's just already jacketed here and it had 2 wires in it. So I used that to extend this connector for that thermostat housing temp sensor. Other than that, yeah, I still got to replace the reverse switch in there. It has the wire pigtail broken off of it, but I should be able to replace that no problem. Started trying to route all of my throttle body and heater hoses. I ended up using that extra piece of heater hose that was meant for the EGR cooler on the F20B and cut it, and I'm going to use a hose barb in between them here with some clamps. I also had to cut a section off of the heater hose from the heater valve in order to make it reach the entire way. So there'll just be an extra set of clamps here, and I just kind of put the lower radiator hose in just to make sure that all looked okay. I also swapped the throttle body cable cam over from the F22 as well because the throttle cable would simply not reach. However, now my problem is that with the stock throttle cable bracket, if I were to tension it properly, then I just simply won't have enough threads here where the nut reaches the cable bracket. So I'm going to see if there's another cable bracket that I could possibly use, or a shim or spacer that I could put in between the nut that's resting against the throttle cable bellows there and the bracket, just to have as some kind of a spacer to take up that slack. Now, on making all of the stock vacuum lines work with everything else that was on the vehicle, I ended up getting a box of vacuum splicing tees. So we're going from all the nibs on the PCB upper manifold are all 1/8 inch, and the only one that isn't 1/8 inch is for the cruise control here. So I have a 90-degree bung here that goes from 1/8 inch, and then an adapter from 1/8 to 3/16, which is the next size up. And then over here, since I only had one vacuum nib, I ended up just using a T and then connected that to the solenoid box under here. The EGR remains unconnected, and then the map sensor is going off of here since I'm not going to use the one on the throttle body. So I'm just going to leave it on there just so it has something to seal against. Ooh, my inner tie rod is worn. Nice. Well, that's another thing I better purchase. And look at that, of course, the boot is all completely torn up. Amazing. All right, so I've got the VTEC solenoid and oil pressure switch wires routed through here. I just went through the evap drain grommet since there are already some wires going through there, and they end up being right next to the ECU connectors. Now, these wires being the same color, I unfortunately don't know which one is which to go to the VTEC solenoid and the pressure switch. I do have the back sides of the connectors opened up to slot the pins in. Pin A4 is going to be for the VTEC solenoid, and pin D6 back here is going to be for the pressure switch. There's connector A, connector B, and connector D. I'll pop up a diagram on screen here, show you what those look like. This view is from the back side of the connector, just so you know. So got to figure out which one of these is which with multimeter and then plug them in accordingly. Also got the P28 with the HON data ECU in. However, there's no really good mounting provision for it because, as you can see, here's the original PT6 and the mounting tabs are in a much different spot than they are on the P28. So I may just have to secure the P28 to the floor somehow and then just put the kick panel over it rather than putting the ECU on the kick panel and then the kick panel on the floor. So I'll probably just have to do that, just considering this is for a Civic and it's a completely different shape with completely different mounting tabs. This somehow worked pretty well in the Prelude, but obviously is a different layout here in the Accord. Okay, I ended up pulling the wires back out of the firewall and used my multimeter, found which one is which for the VTEC solenoid and the pressure switch, and I've labeled them. Now I'm going to pull them back through the firewall.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to start wrapping up this section of the engine swap video just because I need to get the car moved out of the spot so I can start staging some stuff in this garage space. So I went into Costco, got a new battery because unfortunately the OEM one that I had completely died. I don't know why. I had it on a 1 amp trickle charger. It was healthy, and then the trickle charger then showed an error light, and then the battery sat around 5.8 volts or something like that. So it was done. So got a new battery. Costco has every size imaginable for like most common cars, and luckily the Accord runs a very common one. So got that. I'm going to get this hooked up, and I'm going to go in and program the ECU without the VTEC solenoid and pressure switch hooked up because we don't necessarily need that to run. So I just need to get it basically running enough to move it out and park it. And then I'm going to actually leave the accessories unhooked for that and just tighten the crank pulley, and yeah, that should be enough to at least get us running, plus putting some coolant in it because I want to at least check that that won't leak. Engine has oil already, so yeah, then pretty much everything else should be good to go for moving. Oh, and then I also have to fill the clutch system and bleed the slave, so that'll be it. So I went to put my crank pulley tool in here, and unfortunately, because the crank is so, I guess, high up, or at least close to this frame rail, the tool doesn't actually fit in there. So I'm gonna have to trim a little bit out of the top of it here to get this to fit, or at least in some direction, because I need this to be able to hold against, I'm gonna have a breaker bar on this end, and this needs to hold the crank pulley. So while I torque down on it, this needs to be able to fit underneath the chassis rail and be able to rotate as well. I'm at least gonna get it trimmed enough where I can slip it in there and then torque the crank bolt to 159 foot-pounds. All right, so I ended up trimming the backside of the tool to get it to fit under the chassis rail here. And then I took my breaker bar, which luckily swivels more than 90 degrees, and I braced that against the subframe to use as my brace. And then I was able to get my big torque wrench and torque it to spec. So that's done. Drink the juice. 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 Too much juice. Okay, I guess I gotta give the pedal a quick cycle here before I put in more juice. That's not a pedal, that's a pedal. No, that's not a pedal either. What is going on? Oh, the clutch pedal's on the floor, that's why. That's not good. Level is slowly going down as I pump it up. Okay, battery's hooked up. It's definitely powered because I heard the Bluetooth radio go off because it was connecting to my phone. So I'm going to leave the battery tie down out for now just because I'm trying to get this wrapped up more quickly. And I'm only taking it down the street anyways. So that's done. The clutch is still being weird because even after bleeding it, it's not really coming off the ground, or the floor of the car rather. So it hovers now because there's like a little bit of hydraulic pressure, but it's like not building up quite enough yet. So I need to look into it a little further. Over here, I'm going to go get the ECU plugged in, and I have a bass tune to flash on it so I can then get the car started. And also by doing that and getting the ECU hooked up and cycling the key, I'll also cycle the fuel pump, and we can check for any fuel leaks. Woes continue. So as I try pumping up the pedal, I have some leak, what I think is between the body of the master cylinder and the conversion fitting from the metric to AN. So I got to figure out what's happening there. So unfortunately it is leaking, but I'm trying to try to contain it with some towels. The fitting between the line and the converter is tight, but then it's the body of the master cylinder that has the leak. And I've tried to tighten it. It's pretty well cinched up now at this point, so I'm not really sure what is causing that. So I should be able to go start the car just without the clutch, but rolling it around is going to be interesting. I ended up needing to get a different clutch master cylinder because the one I had originally purchased and put in was of inferior quality actually to this Beck Arnley unit I got off of Amazon. As you saw, I was having issues adjusting the pedal travel and where the stoppers end up. And you can see just the difference in quality between like the casting, the machining. And one actually note I want to make is where this fitting is that the my little metric to AN adapter goes. Like in the original master cylinder. It almost looks like it's a little off center, and the taper of the seat inside the fitting was also very poor, so it was leaking from that spot as well, which is, yeah, unfortunately very disappointing, because this is a LUK or Schaeffler unit. It's a common aftermarket brand, and this is just Beck Arnley from Amazon, and the quality on it is way better, and I'm honestly flabbergasted about that. The main thing that's going to fix my issue is you can actually see the difference in length of the push rod. It's very slight. If I line up the flanges here on the right side, the difference is very slight. It's maybe 3/8 of an inch, half of an inch, barely, somewhere in between there. But that's going to make all the difference. And even so, the clevis isn't all that much different, honestly. It's ever so slightly longer, but it's going to make the difference in terms of getting the clutch to work properly, because it was just that last, half an inch almost that was causing the travel to not work correctly. So I'm going to swap over, or rather I've already swapped over the fitting. I put the reservoir off to the side, so I'm going to get this mounted up, bolt it down, and then mount up the reservoir, and then get this adjusted and bled. Fun times. I ended up having a coolant leak at the water pipe here for the thermostat housing, and I noticed when I took the bolts off that mount the thermostat housing to the side of the cylinder head that the connection between the thermostat housing and the water pipe was actually very loose, despite having the O-ring in there. And then I came to my OEM parts repertoire, and I see that I had these 91314 PH7-003 O-rings, which this one appears to be, and that's for the water pipe on a Prelude SI, so H23A1, and not the right size. So looking at the Prelude VTEC, which that thermostat housing matches more closely, we need this one, and luckily I had it, 91314 PR7A00. So I'm going to throw that on with a little bit of silicone grease, get this put back together, and continue filling up the coolant. Okay, had another coolant leak down there, and that ended up being due to this throttle body to thermostat housing pipe. It's a molded pipe. It must be an original one, because the end of it was pretty ballooned, so I ended up just kind of cutting off the end of it that was ballooned and using just a fresh end, and that's seeming to seal up better, so I'm going to refill. I've got the ECU hooked up. Don't forget this ground that goes on your thermostat housing, because that's for your ECU and fuel pump and everything. Because I cycled the keys a couple times and didn't see anything squirting out of the fuel rail, so it looks like that's all good. So pretty much all that's left at this point. Let's see, we got the starter hooked up, the signal is here, ground is on, got the battery cable and starters hooked up, power. So then the last thing I need to do is just get whatever I need hooked up under the dash from what I was messing with the clutch pedal to activate the starter. I'm going to turn it over, just make sure it sounds okay. And I do have the injectors disabled over here. I just unplugged them from the splitter. I'm going to cycle it and just make sure it's pumping up oil. All right, well, I was having some trouble getting this thing to crank at all, so I ended up getting the clutch switch connector out and jumping it with a piece of solder, because I don't know why, it's just because of the pedal adjustment and everything going on with the clutch switch. It wasn't depressing all the way, so I just put a piece of wire in, and now I just realized as well is that I don't really have the oil pressure switch hooked up, so I don't really know yet if it's building oil pressure, unless I put in my gauge, which I will eventually like to do. But it sounds good, and it sounds like it's cranking over very smoothly. So at this point, I just need to go load the tune and fire it up. The next fun step of this process is flashing the ECU. So I'm just going to quickly turn it on and make sure we get the calibration loaded up. I don't necessarily need to pull the one it has on and save it, because I have them saved elsewhere already. Open. Here we go. Opening up that calibration. Let's update. Good.
try to start it. Okay, everything should be hooked up in there. All the plugs, the distributor. I just don't see the tachometer moving, which is one indication of maybe no spark. I definitely smell fuel. I know I put new plugs in there. The only thing I would like to have that I don't have is my timing light, because it could be that the timing is off.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, so you're probably wondering what happened that we went from absolutely no RPM signal or start to suddenly we start. Let me explain. So looking back here, when I rebuilt the distributor, I'm not sure how I didn't notice, but the piece on the back of the distributor here, that little rotor that connects to the backside of the camshaft that spins it, I guess somehow when I put it back on, I had the distributor shaft rotated 180 degrees and then put the rotor back on the shaft and lined it up with the marks that I had pointed out in this segment here, and thought that it was all hunky-dory. So what happened was, not only was I 180 degrees out of time in the terms of the distributor, but then I also had the wrong spark plug wires. I had a whole investigation into that, and the reason why I had wrong spark plug wires essentially was because when I was given the engine and given some spark plug wires, they're just meant for an F23 on a normal CD Accord, so they were totally not the right things anyway, because I had put the wires off mild prelude on the motor and it started up just fine. And so that is a compounding reason for why it wasn't starting. So I ended up just getting a whole new set of spark plug wires. So these are just brand new, known, good H22 wires. And that is what gave me my spark and everything back. Had nothing to do with my adapter here, which you do need because the internal coil distributor needs this 2+8 to 8 pin adapter from Rye wire. So that is needed, but yeah, distributor being out of time and plug wires. All right, well, I got the car running well enough to actually get it into my new place, which I've just barely gotten set up with tools, but now I've got a really good functional workspace and I don't have to worry about swapping cars between my place and another garage and whatnot. So now I've got a dedicated slow car salon garage, which is still in a state of really poor organization, but that's all to come because at least we got the car in here, got plenty of space, got my tools, and pretty much everything else I need to get the swap finished. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.